The last day of work comes. There's usually a card, maybe a cake. People say things like, "You deserve this," and "Enjoy the freedom," and "You're gonna love it." And then the day arrives. The first real Monday. No alarm, no commute, no meeting at 9, no inbox, no one needing anything from you. And somewhere in the quiet of that morning, in a way you were completely unprepared for, something feels wrong. Not just unfamiliar, wrong. Like a sound you've heard every day of your life has suddenly stopped, and the silence it left behind is louder than the sound ever was. Most people don't talk about this because they feel they shouldn't, because they were told this was the reward, the finish line, the thing they worked 40 years toward. So they smile, and they tell people they're fine, and they wait for the feeling to pass. For some people, it does. For many, it doesn't. Not without understanding what actually happened to them psychologically the day that alarm went silent. That's what this is about.
We talk about retirement almost entirely in terms of what it gives you. Time, freedom, rest, travel, no more office politics, no more deadlines, no more answering to anyone. What we almost never talk about is what it takes. And what it takes is significant. It takes your structure. For most working adults, the architecture of an entire day, from the moment the alarm goes off to the moment the head hits the pillow, is built around work. The schedule is not just logistical, it is psychological. It tells you when to wake, when to eat, when to think, when to rest. It gives the day a shape. When that structure disappears overnight, the mind doesn't simply relax into freedom. For many people, it enters a low-grade state of disorientation, a kind of psychological drift that is difficult to name and even harder to explain to people who haven't felt it. It takes your social world. Research consistently shows that work accounts for roughly half of most adults' meaningful social interactions. The colleague you had coffee with every morning, the team you solved problems with, the shared language of your industry, your office, your role. These were not just professional relationships. They were, whether you recognize them as such or not, a primary source of human connection. And they don't typically survive retirement, not because people are unkind, but because the context that created those relationships no longer exists. Without the shared daily experience of work, most of those connections quietly dissolve within the first year. Many retirees describe this as one of the most painful and unexpected losses of the entire transition. It takes your sense of purpose. This is the deepest one. Human beings are purpose-driven creatures. We are wired to need a reason to get up, a problem to solve, something that requires us, something that would be different, worse, if we weren't there. Work, whatever its frustrations, provided that. Not perfectly, not always meaningfully, but it provided it.
Here is where it gets important. The psychological shock of retirement doesn't always announce itself clearly. It rarely walks in and says, "I am an identity crisis. I am depression. I am grief." More often, it disguises itself. It looks like irritability, a short fuse with a partner who is suddenly sharing your space all day, frustration with small things that never used to matter. It looks like restlessness, an inability to sit still, to enjoy leisure, to relax without guilt, a nagging feeling that you should be doing something, even when there is nothing that needs doing. It looks like physical symptoms, fatigue, disrupted sleep,
aches that have no clear medical origin. The body often carries what the mind hasn't processed. It looks like drinking a little more than before, watching more television than you intended, finding ways to fill time that don't actually fill the emptiness underneath. And sometimes it looks like nothing at all. A flatness, a going through the motions, a functioning that isn't really living. Research supports this. Studies consistently show elevated rates of depression and anxiety in the first 1 to 2 years following retirement, particularly among people whose identity was strongly tied to their career, and among those who retire abruptly rather than gradually. One significant study found that the likelihood of experiencing clinical depression increases by approximately 40% after retirement. 40%? That number never makes it into the retirement planning brochure. And yet it is sitting there in the research, quietly waiting for the people it describes to find it.
There is something else worth naming directly. What many retirees are experiencing underneath the irritability, the restlessness, the quiet flatness is grief. Real grief, not a metaphor. The loss of a career, a role, an identity, a social world, a daily purpose. These are genuine losses. They deserve to be grieved. But our culture does not give people permission to grieve them. Because it looks ungrateful. Because you chose this, or worked toward it, or are supposed to be celebrating. Because other people would love to be in your position. So the grief goes underground, unexpressed, unacknowledged, unnamed. And grief that has nowhere to go doesn't disappear. It surfaces as anger, as numbness, as the creeping sense that the best part of life has already happened, and what remains is simply time to be endured. That is not a small thing. That is a psychological emergency in slow motion. And it responds, genuinely responds, to being named, to being treated as what it actually is. Not a phase, not ingratitude, not weakness. Loss. The research on successful retirement transitions, on the people who genuinely thrive rather than merely survive, points to a few consistent factors. The first is identity expansion before the exit. People who begin developing interests, communities, and sources of meaning before they retire, not after, make the transition significantly better. The mistake most people make is treating retirement as the starting line for figuring out who they are next. It works better as a continuation of something already in motion. The second is deliberate structure. Freedom without structure is not liberation for most people. It is anxiety. The retirees who do best are those who impose their own rhythms on their days, not rigidly, but intentionally. Something that gets you up, something that requires your presence, something that matters, even quietly. The third is honest social investment. The relationships lost through retirement need to be actively replaced, not eventually, not when you feel like it. This requires deliberate effort in a way that feels deeply uncomfortable to many people, particularly those who have not had to make new friends since their 20s. But it is not optional. Isolation at this stage of life has consequences that go well beyond loneliness. And the fourth, and perhaps the most psychologically important, is permission to not be fine. Permission to say that the alarm stopping felt like a kind of death, that the freedom isn't simple, that the question of who you are now is harder than anyone told you it would be. Because it is hard. For many people, it is the hardest psychological work of their entire lives, and it deserves to be treated that way. The day the alarm stops is not just a practical change. It is an identity event, a loss event, a psychological threshold that our culture celebrates and almost never prepares people for honestly. If you are in it right now, if the freedom feels heavier than you expected, if the quiet is louder than you can explain, you are not ungrateful. You are not weak. You are not doing retirement wrong. You are human, and you are in the middle of something real. Stay with us. There is more to say about all of it.